The weekly sermons of 45th Street Baptist Church are now available as a podcast through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts.
you know how powerful this is? Do you know what it means in your life? Or maybe I should ask the question, does it mean anything in your life? Until you learn how to study, see what God is saying to you, you'll never really be able to fulfill your purpose. Come on and join us. Join us for 45 minutes of purpose here at 45th Street Baptist Church. I guarantee you, you'll come out thinking differently. And my prayer is, somewhere along the line, you'll find the purpose that God has for you. Come on in and join us.
Welcome to 45 Minutes of Purpose with Reverend Andra D. Sparks.
Good evening, everybody. It's great to be here with you on this wet and rainy Wednesday evening. I'm thankful to God that we have the opportunity to come and share. And this next in our Bible study series, we are in a Bible study series entitled Managing Our Emotions. Managing Our Emotions. And we've had a wonderful 2 studies prior to this time. We last time got together and talked about abandonment, what to do when you are feeling abandoned. First time we got together, we talked about joy, how to experience joy in all circumstances. Tonight, I think we're going to talk about one that comes probably if it's not a sibling of abandonment, it is a close relative. Today we're going to talk about fear. When you are scared, senseless, what do you do? Fear. When you're scared, senseless. And we're going to be using as a foundation for our Bible study. I think it's a familiar song. You may not have read it before, but I believe if not, you will get a lot out of it tonight. It's Psalm 55. Psalm 55. And it's a psalm of David. The author and the editors say of the Bible that I have say that it's a mascule of David. Mascule is simply a term that means a wise saying, or this is a teaching song. And it's sent to the director of music, and the director of music at that time would have put David's wise saying to music. But David wrote this psalm at a time when his life was in turmoil. I mean, he was going through it. And so as we work through what he's written tonight, I think you're going to understand and just what it means to be scared senseless. David had gone through a lot in his young life. He had been in battle with folk who were twice as tall as he was. And so he had known what it was to be in fear. But for some reason, this psalm put him in a different place. What he's writing now put him in a completely different state of mind. He was afraid, but it was a different fear than a battlefield fear. He was afraid, but it wasn't one where he was surrounded by so many other men. He seemed to indicate that he felt, and he does so, all alone. And so let me start reading it for you, and then we'll get into the lesson. Psalm 55, let me just launch out. He says, listen to my prayer, O God. Do not ignore my plea. Seems like we're continuing with the theme of abandonment. He said, hear me and answer me. My thoughts trouble me, and I am distraught. That's a big word. I'm distraught. That means I'm beside myself. I can't gather my emotions. I'm distraught because of what my enemy is saying, because of the threats of the wicked, for they bring down suffering on me and assail me in their anger. He continues, my heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen on me. Fear and trembling have beset me. Horror has overwhelmed me. I said, oh, that I had the wings of a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. I would flee far away and stay in the desert. I would hurry to my place of shelter, far from the tempest and storm. David's in trouble. He's at a place where he's wishing he had wings to fly away and get away from everything that seems to be going on. What in the world could be going on in his life that was so troublesome that would make him write these words? First of all, let's talk about what fear is, and then we'll get back into David's life. You should know that everybody, every single person who lives and who has ever lived has had some place, save perhaps one, has had, and even he did when he was on the cross, has had a bout of fear, a bout of fear, a case of fear. They've gone through something in their lives, in their life, that has made them afraid, something they couldn't control. And this is an emotional feeling, but it's also a physical problem when you're in fear like this. What is it that makes us so afraid? Well, of course, there's a study. There's a study for everything, but they did a study on what people are afraid of. Number one on the list. I bet I don't even have to. If I had a show of hands in here right now, you could tell me what the number one thing on the list is. And the number one thing on the list that people are afraid of is, you got it. That's right. Snakes. Snakes. People don't want to be around snakes. They just hate it. Now, there's some people who love to be around them and use them in their activities and as pets. But most people, I like to say, right thinking people, do not like to be around snakes. There's this message board on the Neighborhoods app. Whenever somebody finds a snake in their yard or around their house or living space, they always post on there, what kind of snake in this is this? Is it venomous? And then you probably have seen it yourself. The people go in on what to do with them. That's a good snake. Don't get rid of him. He's good to get rid of mice and chipmunks around your house, and he's beautiful. Keep him. But I don't have time to interview snakes like that to see if they fit the purpose for keeping my yard clear of chipmunks. So I'm trying to get rid of every snake that I might possibly find around my house, and we have found a couple of them around there. Fortunately, they moved faster than we did, and got away. But the number two thing on the list is, ironically, something that has nothing to do with an animal. The number two thing on the list is public speaking. People are deathly afraid of public speaking. In fact, more people are afraid of public speaking than they are of on the list than they are afraid of dying. Can you figure that? More afraid of public speaking than they are of dying. That's a significant fear. Public speaking, people just dread it. Just quickly on the list, you got 37% of people who responded say they are afraid of heights. 34% say they're afraid of closed or small spaces. Claustrophobic, I have that. 27% fear spiders and insects. I don't like spiders very much, either. My family knows that. 21% fear needles and getting shots, and 20% fear mice, and 18% fear flying on airplanes, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. Fears in the Gallup poll are one of the many things that help identify us with probably more than any other mammal that's on Earth. Now we have these fears. Now these other mammals are afraid because it's life or death, but we have sometimes irrational fears when it comes to dealing with certain things. For example, fears can sometimes we don't even know what we're afraid of. We just have a feeling of dread or doom, and we're afraid of that. And fears can't, sometimes people can't even name the thing that they say they're afraid of. And many people say that if you can't name it, you can't conquer it until you can at least put a face to it, or till you face that fear. And so that's the cure for it, is dealing with what you're afraid of. Some of them are very intense and overwhelming. I don't want to try to make it seem less than important, because some are legitimate fears and they have to be dealt with, or else it can hinder your health or hinder you moving forward. And sometimes people who have the fear of needles but yet have to use needles on a regular basis, that's a serious fear. Not every medicine can be taken in pill form or some other form. Sometimes you have to have a needle, in order to get the medicine in you. And so that's a very serious situation. But other people sometimes they keep the fears simmering inside them. They don't let anybody know what's going on. Now, there are some people who have irrational fears. Some of them are rational, it's a legitimate fear, but some are just irrational, regardless. And when I say irrational, I mean there's no basis in fact for it, but they simply continue to say that they're afraid of it and act according to that fear, such that it's discomforting to everyone around them. Um, I don't know how you resolve those. You probably need to seek some professional help if that's the situation. I would urge that if if you haven't been able to find any other relief, then go see the professionals and they can come up with a treatment plan for you if you think you suffer from some irrational fears. More than any other emotions we experience, however, fear is linked to our brain. Yes, the brain is actively involved, not just our brain, but our nervous system. When we are afraid, there is a physical response that comes from it. Most of the time, we might start sweating, and it's not hot. Not only sweating, we might feel what we call butterflies in our stomach. So there's a connection, and these are involuntary. The blood flow to our eyes might change so that our eyes, pupils dilate. This is something that happens on a regular basis, and it has a scientific name. It's called a fear response. For example, the blood flow changes to your eyes so that your pupils dilate. And this helps you have better peripheral vision so that you can see a little wider path on your sides a little bit better. This comes from our, us as humans trying to identify where the fearful item or animal is coming from. And then there's an adrenaline spike. Yeah, we get ready to either fight or run from the situation. It's released, so we get an extra boost of energy to deal with the circumstances. We have a fight or flight response to it. Either I'm going to run from this or I'm going to fight it where I stand right now. At any rate, our body knows how to kick in and deal with the circumstances when we are afraid. The problem is sometimes our brain gets it wrong. Yeah, sometimes our brain tells us that something is due to be we're due to be afraid of it, and the truth of the matter is it's not a harmful situation for us, and that's because of how our brain processes frightening situations. I got a little graphic if I can pull it up for you right now. I'm going to see if I can show you. For those of you who have the ability to see this, I'm going to share the screen and show you this that's called the amygdala function, and it shows an example of our brain. And there's a fearful input that comes with it. There's a spider here, and our eyes can see the spider. Now, whether that's a real spider or not, we can't digest that immediately. And so, if we don't pause to deal with it, our immediate response is that from our amygdala to our thalamus, this is what it says in the scientific journals, we go straight to being afraid of it. But there's another part of our brain called the visual cortex that allows us to digest whether or not I'm dealing with something real at the moment. Now, these processes are so quick, they're faster than a blink of an eye. But whether or not the visual input is processed through directly through the thalamus or if it goes through the visual cortex makes a big difference. As you can imagine, that sometimes these things are so frightening to us that they can cause us to have a heart problem or a health problem. And so it's important that we learn how to control the input that comes into our minds through our eyes. And I can tell you, having been there's a place in my life when I was okay with being frightened, but I'm not the one who wants to be frightened all the time right now. And so I've learned to try to process things a little bit different because I don't want to walk around jumping like that. There are some who seek these frightening situations. And I guess they can handle it just a little bit. They call it fun. And perhaps to them it is, but it long since stopped being fun to me. There are some people who can never process, like I just said, the long way. They always process the short way. And it's a health problem, a mental health problem. And doctors say it's because they believe in that pathway route, there's a broken pathway that won't allow them to process it properly. And so they find themselves afraid of everything. It doesn't matter if it's an actual mouse or a rubber mouse or a plastic mouse, they're afraid of it the same way. Even though they can look at it and see that it's fake, they're still afraid of it because they're afraid of mice. Some of us are like that around people. All right. You can see a person or a picture of that person and have the same kind of response. We've got to learn how to process these things. So, what is it about David that had him so up in arms? What is it that had him so frightened that he wishes he was a dove and could fly away? According to Psalm 55, David was going through something not only very dangerous, but it was very personal. He had a situation involving his son, Absalom, who was trying to overthrow him on the throne, had planned a coup, if you will. Yeah, he was a rebel and thought that he should be on the throne instead of his father. And so he gathered men to challenge him and to establish a rebellion against the throne. But I think what disturbed David so much is that in this group, not only was his son Absalom, isn't that bad enough? Yeah, that's bad enough that it's Absalom, his son. But it's even worse that another gentleman was with him, Ahithophel was his name. He was one of David's closest friends. And the fact that he would get in league with his son to try to overthrow the throne crushed David's spirit. And he knew that evil was afoot if his son and one of his closest friends were trying to overthrow him. It made him so uneasy, he didn't know who to trust. If you can't trust your son, you can't trust one of your good friends, who in the world can you trust? And so David was on the run and he was in fear and he didn't know who among his men was reliable or trustworthy. So that brings us to how do you deal with these situations when you're off balance completely because you don't know who or what to trust. First of all, you should know this. When we're afraid, we dwell on possibilities and we want to either run, we want to fight, or we just distrust other people. That's where we are. We're dealing with what ifs when we're in this situation, when we're afraid. The almost every Hebrew word for fear occurs in those verses that I read you a few moments ago. The first form of fear is troubling thoughts. And clearly, from what David said, he has troubling thoughts. He said, my thoughts trouble me, and I am distraught. The very definition of fear is what David is saying to us. And then we obsess on those thoughts, on the what ifs. We obsess over what if this happens, or they could do this, on the possibilities. That's what drives us almost insane because we can never draw the conclusion on the what ifs. Dwelling on the possibilities of what might happen produces what's called an oppressive restlessness. It means you can't rest, you can't sleep, you're just running on 100 the whole time. And this, my friend, is dangerous to us physically. You've got to be able to calm down, calm your mind and your body. It's almost like revving an engine in a car and just leaving it there with your foot on the gas. It's oppressive. It's too much. And it cannot go on. It cannot be maintained at that level without medical intervention. So I came to ask you tonight, do you have fears like that? Are they what ifs or are they actual fears? What words specifically was David concerned about? What words of the enemy was he concerned about? Was he suffering from what ifs? And do you suffer from what ifs? When we're afraid, what we do, and he did it, is run. We try to get away from the circumstances. Yeah, and that's exactly what David talks about in verses 6 through 7. I wish I had wings like a dove. I could fly away and get away from the storm and get high above it. But sometimes we can't fly away. Sometimes we're left with no alternative than to stay and stick it out and deal with it. Neurobiologists have identified what I mentioned to you earlier, a fight or flight reaction in our brain. Fight or flight. It's clear from David's writings, even though this took place so many centuries ago, that David is a textbook case of neurobiologist. He is suffering from fight or flight and wishing that he could run away, which is why he said, if I were a dove, I would run away. Yeah, more than anything, like any other animal or being, instead of fighting, most of the time, we just want to get away. That's what they tell us about snakes. They say the snake wants to get away from you more than you want to get away from it. Very few of them are aggressive. Even when cornered, they're trying to get out. They only strike to get you out of the way. In fact, some of them are so sophisticated that they'll give you a dry bite, which means they will strike you, but they will not envenomate you. They will not waste their venom on you because all they want you to do is move out of the way. Now, nobody wants to stay and go through that experiment, but even that snake has sense enough to not use its most valuable resource, venom, in every situation. It just wants to get out of the way. Now, according to Psalm 55, sometimes we have to fight. When we're afraid, we have to fight. Let's look at verse 15. And he says, let death take my enemies by surprise. Let them go down alive to the realm of the dead, for evil finds lodging among them. All right? I'm telling you, sometimes let death take it by surprise. In other words, let the fight come to them and let them not know it's coming. When we're afraid, we got one of two responses. Either we fight or there's flight. All right? The verse that I just read to you from the Psalm, verse 15, is what scholars will call an imprecatory prayer. Imprecatory prayer. We've talked about that here before. And imprecatory prayer is found in other places of the Bible. It seems to be putting like a curse on someone, calling down a curse on them, or calling death upon one's enemies. That seems to be an abuse of what we call prayer. We used to help me prayers, bless them prayers, give them grace prayers. Rarely do we want to see or do we hear, and we certainly don't want anybody praying these type prayers over us, a prayer that wishes that they would have harm come to them, or a hateful, or what we would call an unchristian prayer. David in this space expresses to God his urgings to lash out at them. That's that fight syndrome. All right. Not the flight this time. In other words, let's get them right now. And Lord, I need you to help me get them. When a person is afraid, they become capable of doing things that are out of character. Not that it was out of character for David to fight, but in this instance, he is so off his game, off balance, that he's asking the Lord, who he usually prays for forgiveness from, see Psalm 51. He's asking that same God, bring it on him, God. Let it rain down on him. Let me destroy my enemies completely and diffuse this hatred that they have against me in this situation. An imprecatory prayer asks for God to help you in that situation. It's a negative prayer. Now let's be honest with ourselves. Are you always praying for the benefit of your enemies? Do you always pray that they get better? Or do you sometimes find yourself praying for a situation like David? Let them get what they got coming to them, Lord. Yeah, yeah. Let them get it, Lord. Karma. We call it karma. But I can tell you, some of us are praying imprecatory or negative prayers, and we want something bad to happen to people when we're asking for those prayers. Thank God he's intelligent. He knows how to deal with situations, not just for them, but for us too. All right. When we are afraid, a lot of things happen to us. Our character can change. We become distrustful, not just distrusting of other people, but we also become distrustful. People who could count on us maybe can't count on us so much when we're in a fearful mode. And so it's important that we get ourselves together. Um, we need to be able to be as dependable as we've always been, and we need to be able to be honest. We need to learn how to say, I'm afraid. This is something that's got me scared. And many times we're embarrassed to say that to people. David's fear was so pronounced in this instance that it was almost paranoia. All right. He had the notion of the whole city plotting against him. Read it. Read the psalm. You'll see. Yeah. The feeling stemmed from the fact that he had been betrayed to people who were close to him. If my son betrays me and my good friend betrays me, that must mean that everybody in the city is against me. When we're afraid, we're distrustful. And it was not realistic to think that everybody in the city was against him. But we don't see straight when we're afraid. It's irrational. That's that irrational fear that I told you about. David was struggling. And when we're struggling with fear, all sorts of bad things can happen. Not only that, the second thing I want to tell you about fear is that when we'll find peace from the fear that we have when we surrender the part of the situation we can't control. All right? When we surrender that to God, then we'll start finding a measure of peace. In other words, when you acknowledge and accept the fact that a portion of the circumstances are out of your control, then you have the freedom, the ability in your relationship with God to turn it over to Him. I gave it over to the Lord and He worked it out. Turn it over to Him. And then you can rest in your faith that God has your best interest at heart. It may not resolve the way you want it to, but you do know that God is the one who has control of the circumstances. And so in verses 16 through 18, David is here. And now he's crying out the Lord. He tries to connect with God, all right, by calling out to him. And he says to him, let me see if I can read it for you. In 16th grade, he said, as for me, I call to God, and the Lord saves me. Yeah, because I'm his child. I'm ad-libbing that now. The Lord saves me. Evening, morning, and noon, I cry out in distress, and he hears my voice. He rescues me unharmed from the battle waged against me, even though many oppose me. Yeah. God, who is enthroned from of old, who does not change. Hallelujah. He will hear them and humble them because they have no fear of God. David goes back to his foundations and he says that I'm going to connect with the power source, with my Savior, with the one who has been there for me. And he calls on the name of the Lord. And he said, I'm not going to just reserve it for crying in the morning. When I get up, I'm going to call him morning, noon, and evening. I'm going to make sure he knows that I need him in these circumstances. These are the principles that we can draw from David, that a constant communication with the Lord tells him the significance of what's going on in our lives. And we thank God for his continuous care for us. We thank him for blessing us when we're in situations like that. And David's faith was validated by God. God doesn't always deliver us, though. No, he doesn't. Sometimes he may not be able to deliver us like we need, like we want to be under the circumstances. David was convinced, though, that God is still on the throne, Despite the circumstances that he had, he was convinced that God could still bring him through. And we see this throughout the Bible, that the reader is urged to fear God. We're supposed to fear him. We're supposed to approach him with reverence, reverential awe, because God is able to do abundantly more than we can think of. He can get us out of any situation. There's no circumstance that defies his ability to control it. If we fear God, we don't need to fear anyone or anything else. If we know that God is in control, then there's nothing or nobody else that can control us or our lives. We need to turn it over to him. And so verse 22 tells us to cast our cares on God, and he won't let us fall. Can I read it for you? He said, my companion attacks his friends. He violates his covenant. His talk is smooth as butter, yet war is in his heart. His words are more soothing than oil, yet they are drawn swords. Cast your cares on the Lord. Underline this, circle it. Come back to it as you need to. Cast your cares on the Lord. Put all your weight on God. You ain't too heavy for him. Your circumstance and situation is not too much for him. Cast your cares on the Lord. And David continues, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken. Lay all your cares on him, not at his, on him. Put it on the Lord and say, Lord, I need you. You're the one who can bless me in any circumstance, and I need you in this situation right now. It urges us to focus our, verse 22 urges us to focus our energies on the situation that we actually have control over. All right. Stop going through the what if and start laying your cares on the one who is certain, the eternal one, the one who has never failed, never lost any situation. You've never come up empty when you put your cares in the Lord. God's circle of concern is identical to his circle of influence. When he puts his mind and power to something to intervene, it's resolved. There is nothing that prevents him from being absolutely successful. And that means your life is important to him. When you call upon his name, he is, as your father, obliged to enter in your circumstances and to deal with it. And so, understand this: fear, when it's irrational, can be very harmful to you. When you need help beyond that you're able to control, my strong suggestion to you is that you see someone who is more knowledgeable of dealing with fears than you are. Go see them. Maybe it's someone who's spiritual who can help you. It may be someone who is a medical personnel who can help you. You go see them so that you can help resolve these circumstances. You cannot continue to walk around life completely in fear. No, you got to get that resolved for your health and for your family's benefit. All right. How do you find faith in trying times? How do you find faith in times of fear? I want to tell you today that your faith then is the same as your faith at any other time. It may be a young faith, but it's a growing faith. And you simply have to trust that the Lord will see you through. I know that sounds cliche, but it's absolutely what we all have to go through. You have a choice under those circumstances. You can either allow fear to paralyze you, or you can wait on the Lord to take care of you. That's still a choice. That's the biggest control you have over the circumstances. Allow fear to control you, or wait on the Lord. Waiting on the Lord doesn't mean sitting in a corner and doing nothing. Waiting on the Lord means I put it in the Lord's hand and I'm going about my life as much as I can right now. And so I want you to, as you leave, as we prepare to end this study, I want you to understand that fear is natural. All right? Don't let anybody tell you that it's not. Even though we sometimes react kind of off kilter in scary situations, that's natural too. All right? But we have a choice about how to handle our fear. Either we can let it control us, or we can control the part that we can control. If you're afraid of riding roller coasters, don't go to theme parks. You don't have to do it just to appease people. If you're afraid of haunted houses and scary things and scary movies, don't watch them on your TV. You don't have to sit there just to appease someone. Don't put yourself in that situation. All right. Control the part you can control. Turn the rest of it over to the Lord. I love the songwriter when he said, I turned it over to the Lord, and guess what? He worked it out. I love you. There is absolutely nothing you can do about that. It's my prayer that you, my friend, will have a great evening. God bless you and take care.